We all know that luck is going to play a very big role in a lot of areas of our lives. It plays a large role in romance and love. You know, it's lucky for you if somebody happens to look at OkCupid just at the right moment when your profile is up there, and if it's the right person, great. We know it plays a very big role in our careers. If you came onto the market out of college, onto the job market in the spring of 2008, that might have been very good for you, whereas your equally prepared friend who came on the market in the spring of 2009, during the very beginning of the global financial crisis, might have had a much harder time. Very often, things outside our control, things for which luck matters, play a very big role in stuff we care about. But you might hope that whether your actions are right or wrong is not something that luck is going to affect. I mean, if you sign up for a lucky draw to win something, you know that's a thing for which luck matters. But if you're trying to do the right thing, you might think it shouldn't come out that, wow, I won the lucky draw, my action was right, ha ha ha, you lost the lucky draw, your action was wrong. Luck isn't supposed to, you might think, interact with the moral rightness of action in that sort of fashion. Now, this ends up being a challenge to a very popular kind of moral philosophy, consequentialist moral philosophy, according to which the moral rightness of actions depend on their consequences. So you can sort of see why this would be an appealing kind of view. What matters morally about our actions are things like how they affect others. If an action affects others badly, then it's the wrong thing to do. And if it helps others, it's the right thing to do. That's at the core of one of the most popular consequentialist moral theories, the utilitarianism of philosophers like John Stuart Mill. They thought that the right actions were the ones that increased the pleasure of others, and that the wrong actions were the ones that reduced everybody's pleasure. But you know, a lot of factors outside your control can determine the effects of your actions. And people who have the same good intentions or the same bad intentions can do actions with a very different set of consequences. I'll give a few examples. Reckless driving is one of them. There can be two people with the exact same driving habits and the exact same recklessness. As philosophers like to do, we can imagine them as perfect duplicates of each other, down to the last molecule. And they do the same reckless driving. One drives very recklessly, so does the other. It's just that only one of them has the misfortune to have a small child walk in the road while they're driving. And so only one of them hits and kills a small child. The other person does all the same behaviors, but the child never shows up. If the child did, that person would have hit the child. So one person gets legally punished heavily for hitting a small child with their car, the other person doesn't. Are these people morally different in the rightness of their actions? Did one person do something so much worse than what the other person did? When I talked about this to some of my students, they told me they really kind of feel bad for the person who hit the child and has to live with that for the rest of their lives, more so than overwhelmingly angry at that person as opposed to feeling neutral at the other person who recklessly drove and never created any bad consequences. So it seems like if you take consequences that seriously, you'll end up evaluating people in a very different way, even though internally they were the same. And that might seem wrong to you. And that might suggest that the right way to morally evaluate people shouldn't take these kinds of consequences into account. You can imagine other kinds of cases. I'll give you a couple more. Suppose you decide to help charitable organizations by going overseas to areas where there have been earthquakes and helping people over there. Two people equally strong in goodwill might both decide to do that same thing. But only one of them, because of factors they couldn't have known, might contract a deadly disease, take it back home, infect all their friends at home, and cause some horrible plague. Do we want to say to that person, you did the wrong thing, you evil person, contracting a deadly disease and spreading it back home? Well, no. I mean, that would be a very silly thing to say to them and a very mean thing to say. They were trying to do the right thing. To take one last example, Sometimes people who want to do something wrong, people who want to do horribly evil things, could end up creating wonderful results by sheer luck. So let's take some horribly wrong kind of action, killing people to eat them. Okay, I understand that the lunch was not procured by any people who thought that this was a good thing to do. But suppose we had people, let's place them in about 1905 in Germany, these two cannibals wandering around who like to kill and eat their neighbors. And one person goes around and finds a bunch of German guys hanging out and drinking and kills them all and carries them back home, chops them up, and eats them. And so does this other cannibal. And one cannibal killed a bunch of nice guys and made their families all miserable and ended what would have been incredibly happy, productive lives. And the other cannibal ended up killing Hitler and the original members of the Nazi Party. Do we say to the second cannibal, "You are the best cannibal ever. You are a moral hero of the 20th century. Here, have a medal, you great cannibal"? That's really not our immediate reaction to the moral worthiness of the person's action, even if a person with horrible intentions ends up averting World War II and several genocides and making the 20th century a much better century for millions and millions of people. Really, this is a case where a bad person, through sheer luck, accomplished something good and really doesn't deserve praise for the good consequences that resulted. So you might take this to be an objection to moral theories that evaluate actions based on their consequences. Really, we can't just total up the consequences and use that to determine whether the action is right or wrong. And this might move you towards the historical opponent of consequentialist moral theory, the family of moral theories known as deontology, whose great ancestor is Immanuel Kant. The term deontology comes from the Greek root deon, meaning duty. And this kind of theory says you have certain kinds of duties. If you do those duties, no matter what the consequences end up being, what you did was right. And whether you do these duties is governed by features of your intentions and features of the actions that flow from them that are very tightly connected to the intentions. So if you try to do a helping action, that's right, making it the case that both of our friends who flew off to help the earthquake survivors were doing the right thing, even though one produced much worse consequences than the other. It has the result that both of our reckless drivers have the same generally negative moral status in not looking out for others on the road. And it has the consequence that both of our cannibals are terribly evil because they had terribly evil intentions. Now, this, I think, is a reason to be interested in deontology, but I'm a consequentialist. And I'm going to tell you a way for consequentialists to respond to this, how and why you should build a moral theory based on consequences, and then how such a theory can deal with the kinds of cases that I've already described. First, let me tell you why it's better to prefer a consequentialist moral theory for judging actions. And let me focus on the case of our people who are interested in helping the earthquake victims. Suppose you're one of those people, one of those two people, and you want to know what the right thing to do in your situation is. You want to know whether it's good to go out and help the earthquake victims. Well, suppose we don't actually have such wonderful people around to ask very often in our lives, but suppose if you like Harry Potter, you could imagine the person as a wizard. If you like science fiction, you can imagine an amazingly powerful computer that can give you answers to questions. And you ask your person or your computer, or if you're very religious, you can imagine asking God, you imagine some incredibly knowledgeable agency. What's the right thing to do? Well, on the deontological view, on the view of philosophers like Kant, where the right action is determined by your intentions, both of the people who are going to help out in the troubled country, it tells them both, yes, going there is the right thing. It's driven by the right intentions. And so imagine what happens when the person with the disease comes back and sees themselves dying and having infected all their friends, and asks, wait a second, you told me that this was the right thing to do, and look what's happened. And the answer is, it was the right thing to do. Your intentions were great. Now you might think, that's not where we want to end up. When we ask what the right thing to do is, we want something more. We want the answer not to be something about what the right thing inside us is. We want to know what will, perhaps, create the good consequences. That's what our friends who are trying to figure out whether flying off to help people in the troubled country, that's what they want to know about, I think. Not about whether their intentions will make the act right. So we need our theories to respect that fact, that we're interested in things beyond our intentions very often when we try to do the right thing. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to have theories that make the right thing something out there in the world that we care about, and at the same time don't have us end up calling some of the cannibals great heroes of humankind who ought to be praised by everyone, and cause other people who went off to help others be regarded as villains? How can we separate these issues? So at this point, some people say things like, well, isn't this all subjective? That's how morality is, right? But I don't think that helps us very much. Even if it is all subjective, within the structure of the subjective practice that we care about, because we care about being good people and doing the right thing, we still have to find an answer within that, within the subjective nature of morality. So I think those answers aren't going to help us very much. Here's what I suggest. Separate the question of whether the action was right from whether the person was good. What makes an action right? Well, that's in the consequences. That's in whether good things or bad things result in the world. But sometimes, good people, through no fault of their own, can end up doing bad things. And bad people, through no fault of their own, can end up doing good things. Whether you're a good person or not, whether you're a virtuous agent, as some philosophers like to say, depends on your intentions and what you care about. And if what you care about is making the good things happen, making the things that are really good, averting the suffering of others, causing happiness to people, if those are the things that move you, that makes you a virtuous person, no matter what ends up happening. But doing the right thing is still a matter of having those things actually happen. And this is how good people can do bad things, and bad people can do good things. Thanks.